evening, everyone, and welcome to the August 27th, 2018 Council Study Session. We'll start off with roll call.
Mayor Baggett.
Here.
Councilmember Brown.
Here.
Councilmember DeCoursey.
Here.
Councilmember Holman.
Here.
Councilmember Klozak.
Excused.
Councilmember Trout Manuel.
Here.
Councilmember Wells.
Here.
There are no announcements, reports, and presentations, I do not believe. So we will move into 2A, Draft Climate Action Plan.
Good evening. For the record, Jeff Tate, Director of Community Development, and with me is Kendra White, who is with Cascadia Consulting Group. And tonight's first agenda item is the Draft Climate Action Plan. Council's packet includes a agenda bill cover sheet with some background information regarding the initial budget inception for doing this work. As a quick reminder, back in 2008, we prepared a greenhouse gas inventory that analyzed city operations as well as some of the data associated with the general community. Came back and did some more update work in 2015, which those efforts are informing this draft climate action plan. Kendra will walk us through some slides that go through and summarize the climate action plan. I think it's important to think about both municipal operations, municipal sources, as well as community operations and sources of greenhouse gas, as well as actions that can be taken within the community to help reduce our footprint. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kendra.
And thanks for having me. Again, I'm Kendra White from Cascadia Consulting Group. So we've been working with the city on both, as Jeff mentioned, updating the climate action plan, or the inventory and the climate action plan. So we were also involved back in 2008 for that inventory, so it's nice to get an updated snapshot of how things are progressing here in Auburn. And just kind of a quick reminder, originally in 2007, the city had signed on to the U.S. Mayor's Climate Protection Agreement, which is kind of the underpinning rationale for looking at the city's emissions and also considering actions for reducing those emissions. And so when we were doing this work, we were looking both at the sources of emission as well as the city goals. So you already have great community values that align well with these topics, including protecting the natural environment and a lot of topics around vibrancy and both culturally and kind of community, local economy, and it's all in balance, so both considering the benefits of reductions but making sure it's meeting other city priorities around doing that in a cost-effective manner and considering other public benefits. So we wanted to take all of that into account as we created this draft climate action plan. So as a quick starter, so we, as I mentioned, did the update of the inventory, so we did a snapshot of the municipal portion of those emissions as well as looking at the broader community's impact on emissions. And so the way to think about this is that the community incorporates the municipal, but they're important to both understand kind of the part of the footprint where you have a lot of control and then also kind of the broader context for climate action in this city. And so between the original inventory in 2008 and 2015 across both the community and municipal, it kind of averages about 30% reduction per capita, which is really important to consider when you're thinking about growing cities, and having dense and development is really important for making sure that climate action is kind of on a regional scale happening. So getting people into the town is definitely not to be discouraged. So helpful to kind of think about that, both in absolute and relative reductions, but nice to see even with growth, there's been kind of absolute reductions in those emission sources as well. So one of the ways that we wanted to kind of put together this portfolio of strategies was to consider where the emissions are coming from, specifically by sector. Like many other municipalities, a lot of the emissions are from the energy sector. So even though there are kind of three smaller bars, when you add up together those blue, yellow, and black bars, those are all energy bars. So on the whole, more emissions come from there, but transportation is also a really meaningful part of emissions. waste is a really small portion of community emissions, but is a really visible way that people have engaged with community climate action. So recycling, et cetera, is a really visible way. So important to still consider it, even though it might not be making the most impact on reducing emissions. And then within the municipal sector, so that's really looking at the things that you guys control. Again, it's where you have the most ability to influence these. So this includes your fleet. Notable here is the police fleet. Like many cities, obviously there are many considerations, including having idling vehicles and kind of more horsepower vehicles. So that's a big component of that fleet vehicle piece. Buildings and facilities. There's a lot of administration associated with government operations, so that's obviously a big input as well. And then since you guys operate your local conveyance system for water, any of the pumping related electricity is also captured here. And then again, since you own and operate your traffic lights, those are another source of emissions. And then those are kind of the core set of emissions. And then we also look at kind of other things where you can influence but are kind of less in your direct control related to your employee commuting and travel. So that's something you guys can influence, but obviously others have a role in that as well. So kind of taking a step back in terms of why does all of this matter? I mean, there are a lot of local impacts to climate change, including rising temperatures. We've kind of all probably experienced the warmer summers. That's also coupled with extreme droughts, flood storms, smoke, obviously. And then the region is also a lot of economy around the oceans, shellfish, et cetera. So ocean acidification, again, is one of those nice places where there's both that environmental resiliency as well as kind of economic resiliency tied into one. So those are some of the considerations. So as I mentioned, we're kind of putting together packages, but wanting to keep these really manageable. So when kind of thinking about the right way to bundle these strategies for how we might reduce these emissions, wanted to think across the three main categories, so energy, transportation, materials, and waste. And so we looked at that both for municipal operations and for community-wide, and wanted to do a top 10 for each of those, again, to keep things really focused. And then we split this number of strategies across the areas in relative proportion to how they match to emissions. And then, so in terms of how we went about selecting these, the strategies we'll go through in the following slides, we looked at 4 criteria. We looked at environmental benefit, which again is kind of the effectiveness of these strategies, taking into account what you've already done. So some of the really effective strategies that you might be thinking of in your head might not be on this list because you've already made a lot of action in those areas. We also took into account feasibility, which is again taking into account those economic considerations as well as political buy-in. And then materials and waste is an important, ROI is an important place to consider. That's really where we put the numbers to all of these strategies and think about what can be cost effectively done, both in general, but also where in the process, the lifespan of a product or a process, it might be most cost effective to implement some of these solutions. So we'll kind of go into that and some of the specific strategies. And then implementation, so kind of thinking about, do these actions make sense to do now? And then there can always be follow-up actions later, so kind of thinking about sequencing as well. So our team, with our experience doing climate action plans, rated across these criteria. The criteria themselves were developed in collaboration with staff, and then we got a lot of input about, again, what's already happening in the city, so we could take that into account, figure out where there's a lot of momentum and energy and enthusiasm from city staff. So those inputs are all reflected in the strategies we'll present in the next slides. So across, starting with city operations, so there are 4 strategies that are associated with the energy sector. So you guys are already transitioning to LED lights as there are replacements. So that's, again, a really cost-effective place in the life cycle of that source to be making those upgrades. So staff really wanted to make sure that this was highlighted, and that continues to be a priority for the city. And then we also considered co-benefits throughout all of these, so things like health and comfort, public health and safety, et cetera. So a couple of the strategies really speak to some of those co-benefits, like HVAC and ventilation, having more comfortable buildings as well as more efficient buildings. And then another place where you get a lot of bang for your buck is around doing better insulation of existing buildings, can increase comfort as well as the performance of those buildings. And then, a really cost-effective option is to just monitor, because, it's helpful to have the data in order to make progress. So we have a strategy on here around adopting performance standards and kind of monitoring over time, so you can kind of see how different buildings are performing and might kind of draw attention to those places where there are buildings that might need some upgrades. The city has worked with energy service companies in the past to find those opportunities, but this will allow you to kind of have a broader understanding of those opportunities without needing special consultants. Transportation is also a pretty big slice, so it has an equal number of strategies here. So one of the ways that we started off that segment of strategies is to think about kind of enabling strategies, what helps all of the other strategies be implemented. And what we found in our work is that having a kind of comprehensive plan is a really important starting place so that all of the different activities can be coordinated. So that's the first strategy. And then adopting energy efficiency standards, again, thinking about where that happens in the life cycle. So as vehicles are replaced, considering the energy efficiency of those vehicles. The nice thing is as you adopt efficient vehicles, you're also having less air pollution, so there's public health benefits to having those strategies in the plan as well. And then encouraging incentives, so this kind of gets to the piece around employee commuting. So again, you play a role in how people commute. Having those options is really important. And then, there was a lot of tension when we had the staff conversation about telecommuting and flex time policy. Obviously, everyone's primary concern is making sure they're serving customer needs, but wanting to make sure that they can also kind of reduce the peak congestion times getting to work as well. So, all considerations there. Move quickly through the waste ones, because again, this is mostly about walking the talk. These are just important to make sure that the city is kind of keeping up with best practices. And that includes both the end of life as well as the beginning of life in terms of deciding which products to purchase in the first place. And then thinking about how you can support broader community action on the energy side. There's a lot of regional support for kind of providing technical assistances to businesses and other organizations that can help reduce their load. So providing just kind of an access point to some of those existing resources and technical assistance can be a really effective way. It doesn't require expensive incentives on the city's behalf, but just provides access to those really important catalysts to the information. And then again, performance standards, really cost-effective way that you can encourage action in the community. And then when we think about the reductions that have happened to date in Auburn's inventory, a lot of those have been because the electricity sources have been getting cleaner over time. So the additional efforts to kind of provide clean energy options by advocating for those strategies at the state, regional level can be really important because they flow through so many of the different processes, both municipal and community-wide. And then water, again, it has the nice co-benefits element where obviously water conservation is good. It helps reduce pumping and cleaning, and so there's the kind of carbon nexus there by the less you have to pump, the less you have to process, the fewer emissions are associated with that. So getting dual benefits there. And then in terms of, again, supporting the actions of the residents, it's about providing those enabling strategies. And so one of the things that we've noticed with communities is that having access to charging can really dramatically increase adoption, even if they never use those chargers. So just having kind of visible options in the community, a couple is enough to just kind of really encourage people to feel comfortable with making that switch. Also a place to kind of help. I mean, there's a very walkable downtown, but the other opportunities to make sure that sidewalks, et cetera, stay in good repair is both helpful from reducing single driver car trips, but also again has that public health benefit by getting people walking, getting their steps in. And then one of the most important things that cities can do around climate is just to encourage dense walkable communities so that people don't have to be in their cars in the first place and can just walk and get their groceries and their other needs met. And then there are opportunities that are more cost effective. So kind of fourth in our list is considering kind of incentives or transportation infrastructure changes that kind of support some of the broader community actions. And then for materials and waste, there's a lot of opportunities to work with haulers to, again, find resources that are already existing. One of the kind of major barriers to actions around recycling and materials reuse is just not having sufficient bin space, so kind of working with haulers to make sure that those bins are sufficient for the number of recyclables that are generated now that, especially now that more people are buying things online, more cardboard's generated, et cetera. Some of the previous bin systems aren't quite large enough to handle the load, so it's sometimes the reason things end up in the waste is just because there's no space in the recycling. And then other ways are just to kind of support reuse of materials. That can include anything from new operations like Facebook, et cetera, where there's opportunities to share and buy used products, but also I furnished my entire apartment from Goodwill, so good old reuse stores are still perfectly good options as well. So, so these are the draft strategies that we think are good fits for the city of Auburn. So the next steps are to kind of help put this into an implementation framework. And it may also be helpful, one of the things that can be great about climate action plans is they're a rallying point for action in this area. So engaging the community kind of at the level that makes sense for city resources is a really effective way to, again, it's its own strategy with climate action is just to communicate the climate action and then to continue to monitor progress over time. So happy to answer any questions.
Councilmember Wheels.
I want to thank you for writing your recommendations in terminology that I can understand. Because it makes it very sellable to the public when we can understand it. And it's also nice to see that the city leadership has done much to give us a head start on many of those recommendations already. So we've got a positive record on many of these. So thank you very much.
Councilmember DeCoursey.
So, Jeff, I'm looking at page 74, 192, under municipal action E4, the optimization of building envelope. You have the 4 bullet points there looking at potential items we could address for building envelope upgrades. Do we have these conditions, such as single pane windows in our buildings, or do we have areas where building envelopes can actually be addressed, and how we can improve that overall? And if so, have we looked at a potential plan for that and a partnering perhaps with an ESCO to get us where we need to be?
So for existing facilities, of course, we have a long history, rich history as a city, so we have a lot of different types of facilities that are in a lot of different levels of efficiency. So there's definitely areas to look for some of the older buildings, but part of this part of what's important, I think, to understand is that our facilities group already does a lot of that work. We're not probably telling that story very well. They do efficiency audits of different types of buildings. They work with Puget Sound Energy to try to get qualify for rebates and for upgrades to buildings for becoming more and more energy efficient. We don't have a real good mechanism in place to really track what we're doing though. But we do have conditions in different buildings that you know, there's always room for a little more improvement to be more efficient. And you know, really set the stage. What this document can do is set the stage that 2 years from now, when we're having the kinds of budget conversations that we're having now, we can align some of those requests to some of these types of actions. And it's not just buildings. I mean, it's electrical vehicles and the electric vehicle charging stations that this council is already talking about and wanting to put into action. It's the conversation about swapping out all of the street lights to LED. We're already doing that with new development, but to go back and address the older street lights. You know, the council and the city in general, we're doing a lot of things. We're just not tracking it very well, and if we're not tracking it very well, that means we're probably not as organized as we could be in terms of the plan we put forward.
I think that you make a good point there, because I think if there was a way to gather some of that information, bring it back to us, so looking at conditions overall, it might be beneficial to look at that for future budgeting purposes. And also, again, you're looking at focus on the building envelope, because that could be a pretty heavy price tag when we get building envelope upgrades, and what that means. Outside of rebates and such, we would probably qualify for. But also, again, looking at it from the potential of engaging in ESCO and looking at what that might bring for the future, to give us some opportunity to recap some of that money and also to look at our future energy efficiency. So perhaps looking at the ESCO program may be something we might want to explore.
Yeah, for sure, and I think that's a really good point. I think that the beauty of a lot of the actions in here is that they're mutually beneficial to both climate and the city's pocketbook. I mean, there are items that require some upfront investment, but they tend to pay for themselves in time.
Councilmember Holman.
I'd be remiss if I didn't mention our colleague Bill Pelosa, who's not here tonight, but he always encourages this body and the city to look for energy efficiencies. I think back when we were approving the plans for the community center, wanting solar panels on the roof. We couldn't afford them, but the roof is built so that it is in the right angle to add them at some time in the future. And he's always talking about the city being able to walk its own talk and demonstrate for the rest of our citizens the best way to achieve some of these goals that we have. So thank you, Bill Pelosa.
Any other questions? Thank you both.
One of the final maybe parting comments on this is what we would like to do. We wanted to present the draft plan, see if there were any questions, but really is to bring this back forward to council in a little bit more formal setting to sanction the plan and the blueprint looking forward. So, you know, maybe in the form of a resolution or something like that in the future.
Councilmember Wales.
When you started reviewing this and I saw the 10 recommendations and that they're written so clearly, it might be nice to have a one-card sheet that summarizes them, or we even consider putting them on the wall, so that as we make some of our other decisions, we're always conscious of how we can do the job better. And because we, like you said, not only does the city benefit, but the budget benefits and our citizens. So it would be nice if you could get it down.
Thank you both.
Thanks for your time.
Next, we have 2B, which is the King County Cities Climate Collaboration.
Again, for the record, Jeff Tate, Director of Community Development, and with me I have Megan Smith, Director of Climate and Energy Initiatives in King County, as well as Rachel Brombaugh, Energy Policy and Partnerships Specialist. And Rachel and Megan work in the area of K4C, and we talked a little bit about K4C a couple months back. And I provided a presentation on K4C and what the Climate Action Initiative is between the King County and cities within King County, and provided some background information. And at that time, council had indicated that they'd love to hear from staff at K4C as we contemplate this as a decision as to whether the city of Auburn joins in the initiative. So with that, I'll turn it over to Megan and Rachel.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. So I'm going to kick us off. And first, I just want to say thank you for having us here to share a little bit about K4C. Right now, we have 14 cities in King County who've joined, along with the Port of Seattle and King County. And we've been in place for several years now, and we found it to be a really good way to kind of pool our resources and expertise. So if an issue comes up like, hey, how did you use energy services performance contracting in your city, you'd have another city in that group who's done it recently who could share their experience and what they got out of it. It's a way for us to be more influential about state policies that relate to things like renewable energy, and also to go to utilities like Puget Sound Energy, get more options for purchasing renewable energy. And it's also a way for us just to be more cost effective in our actions. So we've found it to be really helpful, and we hope we can offer that to you as well. And just to kind of get us grounded here, I wanted to just start off with kind of a little bit about the climate impacts that we're experiencing. I just want to hit on a few of these that are most pertinent to the city of Auburn. And when we look at the past few years, we kind of see it as a dress rehearsal for what could come in the future. So we look at the winter storms we had back in 2015 and flooding then. The record temperatures we've had, summer of 17 was the hottest and driest summer on record. We'll see where we are in 2018, also pretty hot and dry. And I bet you all experienced and probably did not enjoy the bad air quality we had over the past couple of weeks from wildfires, and we expect to see more of those wildfires in the future. So those kind of impacts we're really seeing those now. When I'll hit also in Auburn too, we look at those record temperatures, the air temperatures, we also see record water temperatures. So you think about, I'm familiar with Councilmember Pelosa through work of the Wyronine Salmon Recovery Forum, all the efforts that Auburn and the other Green River Valley cities have done to restore habitat here. We still really see a problem with water temperatures in the green and salmon being able to survive as they move upstream. So we expect more of those challenges. They're already here, and we expect those to become more severe. So that kind of motivates us to want to work on this. And when we talk about climate impacts more and more, we're putting it in terms of environment, economy, and health. So when you were doing the presentation on the climate planning work you were doing and some of the policies you have that guide, your look at environmental sustainability and thinking about, fiscal responsibility of the city, having a vibrant environment and that broader environment, that's kind of how we think about it as well. Again, we really see on the environment side, we're seeing increasing stress for salmon. On the economic side, we expect to have more severe winter rainfall events. So the kind of runoff we get to our stormwater systems that hits our roads, our bridges, our stormwater outfalls, we see that becoming more severe. And in the health realm, we're already seeing increased hospitalizations during when we have heat waves. We don't really think about heat waves in central Puget Sound. We think about that in Texas or the East Coast or Chicago. But it's happening here, and people don't have air conditioning typically here, so we are seeing those health impacts. And when we map out kind of where we expect those impacts to be and overlay it with where people already have health issues of asthma or diabetes in the county, a lot of that falls in South King County. So especially an issue here. The good news, I'd say, and we start to look at why act on climate change, is that a lot of the things we need to do as local governments are things that are kind of in our wheelhouse as local governments, and also they bring us other benefits. So we have a little bit of the money bag part of the slide. I think about conserving resources. So for King County and our own operation, we are saving a lot of money now annually because of energy efficiency improvements. And I was reading through the information on your climate inventory, and it looks like your city, you've made really substantial progress on energy efficiency in your building energy or building emissions. That's a place you save money. I happened to stop by the ladies' room on the way in here. I saw your note on the wall about the savings that you get from using green cleaning products. When I think about energy purchases for King County in our operating budget, that's a really significant part of our budget, is buying energy to treat wastewater and process solid waste, run our buildings and facilities. And we actually are gonna take part in Puget Sound Energy's new Green Direct program. We'll switch over to wind and solar power starting in 2019. And when we started looking at that as an option for us, we saw the benefits for climate change. We'd get a 20% reduction in our greenhouse gas emissions. But we now are projecting that over the life of that contract, we'll have, with PSE, over 10 years, we'll save $5 million potentially. So big financial savings for the county as well. And there's the last thing, when we start looking at changes we make for climate change, they have other benefits for our environment. So why does city action matter? When you go back to the emissions inventory information you got earlier from your consultant, when you look at the amount of emissions from city operations, it's pretty small in the scheme of things. But I heard you saying that you want to be a good role model for your residents in your city. And also, when you kind of add up the actions of all the cities together, it's really significant. So cities under 100,000 population are 44% of our population in the county, and we know that 98% of new growth is happening in cities and designated urban areas. So cities really are going to have a major impact. And as I mentioned before, you can save money and resources. So I always come back to, a lot of times I'll hear some cities say, what we do is, how much influence do we really have? And when you start looking at things that cities and county, like we control, land use and transportation, building codes, kind of building on the state and federal building codes, purchasing, renewable energy production, if you have solar on a building, for example, and then also when we weigh in on federal and state policies for where electricity comes from and how available renewable energy is. So the example I gave of the Puget Sound Energy Green Direct program partly came out of the county joining with cities and going to them and saying, hey, we really want another option for purchasing renewable energy, and they did create that option, and we supported them in getting that approved through the Utilities and Transportation Commission. In the next few weeks, an opportunity we're pursuing with city partners to have more influence is we're working on a sign-on letter about federal fuel economy standards. So we've seen the federal administration propose to pull those back. We were really relying on those to meet our climate goals, and also for health. We want to reduce emissions from vehicles. So we're gonna do a joint letter on that. We're also getting ready to comment on policies that the State Utilities and Transportation Commission is considering for electric vehicles. So it's looking at what kinds of programs and incentives would Puget Sound Energy offer for electric vehicles. So that's another area we'll have some joint influence on.
And the Clean Power Plan repeal.
And also the federal Clean Power Plan repeal. So with that, I want to hand it over to Rachel, who's going to go into a little bit more detail, just of a case study of local government action, and I've already covered part of this, I'm sorry, on that Green Direct, and then get into what it means to join K4C, what do you need to do to join, and what benefits do you get out of it.
So I'm Rachel Brumbaugh. I work with Megan in the Executive Office on Energy Policy and Partnerships. Thank you again for having me here. Megan has mentioned this, but this is a real good example of both good for the environment and good for your pocketbook. And I was really pleased to hear that this group has already embraced that you can do both. There's no false dichotomy between the two. But this is a case of action where we, plus some large businesses, have been advocating for cleaner electricity supplies. PSE's mix is largely coal and natural gas, and in order to reach our climate action emissions goals, we really need cleaner electricity supplies. So we had multiple conversations over many years, and PSE came up with a program called Green Direct, which was approved through the Utilities and Transportation Commission, which allowed them to build out a certain amount of capacity, and the first tranche will be wind and the second tranche will be solar. And we, municipal entities and large customers over in a certain rate schedule, can buy into this. And so we ran a bunch of models, just the way that the structure is. We ran a bunch of models to figure out, was this a prudent financial decision? It was clearly a home run on the policy side from an emissions reduction, because it will reduce our operational emissions by 20%. But was this a good financial decision? We are clearly responsible to taxpayers just as you are. So we ran a bunch of different models and pulled escalation data for conventional fossil fueled supplies from the Northwest Power and Conservation Council, a multi-state planning body that looks at both fish and wildlife and energy use. Pulled that, ran some estimates out, and really the estimates have, these are estimates and they will change slightly, but we do project that if current rates hold and our projections hold, we will save approximately $5 million over the 10-year term that we're signing up for. Clearly, we're a very large load. If you are a smaller load, you will have fewer savings, but still, that is a lot of money that we will be not spending on utilities. And we also really supported it is that it's going to be the wind and solar are going to be, one is going to be down in Lewis County, and the solar is going to be near Richland, more in central Washington. You know, those are jobs. Those are jobs in areas that really need jobs, both the construction and then the ongoing maintenance and operations of it. So we really felt comfortable about that. And there's lots of other stories on this too. I mean, an example of the collaboration on this is that King County is fortunate enough to have staffing, myself and Megan, that can work on developing these models and doing the research on wind prices and solar prices. We develop these Excel models and draft ordinance language, and also some presentation materials that we have shared freely with everyone who is interested in it. So if that's something that Auburn is considering, let me know and I'd be more than happy to share. Right. So this jumps right into what is the K4C? It is a voluntary but formal collaboration. There is an interlocal agreement that we would ask Mayor Backus to sign. But it really is local governments, as Megan said, 14 cities, including your neighbor Kent, who just recently joined in the last month, and the Port of Seattle, who's slightly different than a city and a county, obviously, but a very large regional entity. And we work together not only to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, that's our formal charter, but we do keep that lens of what is the health of our region for the residents in our region, and what is the economy of our region. So we really want to have all of these things in our lens as we're looking. And we collaborate on a wide range of things. You know, sometimes we're like a green team. We're a mini green team for a smaller agency or city, and we look at energy efficiency, sharing knowledge on energy efficiency, sharing knowledge on building codes and zoning, and sharing knowledge on how do we engage with the public. Councilmember Wales, I really appreciate your plain language approach, and that is a very important way to engage the average citizen on what is happening and why is this important. So some of the other things that we are looking at when we collaborate is looking at our accountability. So we, like the city of Bellevue, for example, is very interested in tracking and dashboarding city operations data. So we've got ways that we can look and see how the different cities are doing. We have a loan program that King County can loan out to cities for energy efficiency or renewable energy projects, and we have very set ROI and cash flow, and it's a very fiscally sound product that protects both our taxpayers and the city's taxpayers, just to make sure that we're making good investments that do have a good ROI on projects. So there's just an example of some of the things that we do.
So those solar panels that Councilmember Pelosi was talking about, how the roof accommodate the roof, you could think about applying for a loan for that.
We could talk about
for the
that,
city loan
exactly.
program.
So who's in the K4C now? If Auburn were to join, we would need to zoom our map out quite a bit in order to put Auburn Star there. But you can see those are our members. The Port of Seattle recently joined earlier in the year, and as I said, Kent just recently joined. So we calculate that we make up about 80% of the overall population of the county. And when we can pool together 80% elected officials representing 80% of the population, that's a really powerful means. So that's just one of them, and that's how, like Megan mentioned, sign-on letters. How that very frequently happens is that the county will draft a letter. We do get feedback from the cities. It's written in a way that really states our policy goals, the benefits to our residents, any economic benefits, or if it's one against a detrimental change in policy, it's the other way around. But we put those out together, and it's really impactful, and that's a way that an individual city can really contribute also. But what we do generally is we share learning and tools. We're a resource for each other with that peer-to-peer networking. we respond to constituents. We've seen in many cities there's grassroots organizations that are really calling for climate action, particularly with smoky skies and hot weather and poor fish conditions. Again, ensure that our actions have regional impact and speak with a collective voice that I was talking about, and really coordinate to have that regional approach for solutions, not one city doing this and another doing this and doing this. So we're really trying to pull together as one team. And so how, so what does that mean day to day? As I mentioned, there's an interlocal agreement, and that is, you've seen a copy in your packet. That's a very broad commitment to work towards carbon emission goals and collaboration. And then and it defines the annual financial contributions, which are based on Auburn's 2010 population as drafted in the ILA. So that would be $2,000 a year. It can be prorated if you were to join mid-year. So then there is also the joint county-city climate commitments, and that lays out much more specific policy goals and actions that members would pledge to support. And again, that's optional. Most cities have signed on, but it is optional. And just as I mentioned, if we had a sign-on letter about the light-duty vehicle standards, the CAFE standards, or the Clean Power Plan, if that's something that your council was not comfortable signing, it's optional. It is not something that you would need to sign on. Cities sign on as they feel comfortable with the content and the message of the letter. Staff meets 8 to 10 times a year. We have meetings you can call in. Most are face-to-face, where we meet with agendas to go over projects that we're currently working on, do some reporting, do some peer sharing. And then we have elected official summits convened by the county executive 1 or 2 times a year. Our next one is coming up fast. It is October 2nd from 3 to 5 p.m. It is in Kent. Actually, they're thrilled to host as a new member. And all of you are invited. I hope that you got an invitation. All elected officials in the county are invited, whether or not you are a member. So I would welcome you to attend and see what it's like and see how the summit goes and who the other elected officials who are members or maybe investigating being members are. This year we'll be talking about discrete actions that we want to take to advance some clean electricity goals, both at the local level, and then talk about the legislative session coming up in 2019 and how we can be impactful in this session. This is the financial commitment that I discussed here. This is just the chart for one. It's very tiny. And then lastly, this is my favorite cartoon. And I've really heard a lot of the conversations around here. You know, what if it is a hoax? Too bad. We made a much better world for our children and our citizens and the animals that live here. So I did want to put that up there. But, you know, lastly, you have this contact information. I am a source of information for you. My colleague, Matt Kuharek, who is Climate Change Program Coordinator, he is the co-chair of the K4C, as is Nicole Sanders, who is a planner for the city of Snoqualmie. So we've got representation at the K4C staff leadership from both very large and very small. And then there's a couple links for more information. But I want to thank you for your interest and look forward to any questions you have.
Councilmember DeCoursey.
So Rachel, you may not know the answer to this, but just curious, are there more installations of solar panels being made that you're aware of with the city partnerships now? And the reason I ask is because there's a building just to the west of us here that has a solar array on it, and the return on investment was years. It's been quite a while since it's been done. So has that improved to a point where we're seeing a better time frame on return on investment? And are we actually seeing some benefits of solar panels being installed?
Generally, that price curve for both solar and wind continues to fall. It is the rate of decline is slowing, but it does continue to fall. Also, in the last session, the legislature, the state legislature did actually land on some solid incentive program. The couple years before the program, just by the way it was designed, the incentives were uncertain. You might have a certain incentive one year, and then what most subscribers were seeing was that the incentive fell. And so clearly uncertainty in the market doesn't promote uptake, but now we're seeing that both the cost to clients and the certainty of the state and federal incentives, we are seeing continued growth in solar.
One of the,
Oh, go ahead.
you go first, I'll go after you.
Okay. What I would add to that, if I channel one of our energy managers, he always says efficiency first. That's your best return on investment. And for solar, price is coming down, and often what we're doing is we're bundling together some building envelope improvements, heating and cooling, other energy efficient like LED lighting, and putting in solar at the same time, and going after a commerce grant, going after utility incentives, and we package all that together, and then we're able to make it work. So when you see Federal Way Aquatic Center, huge solar array there, the Kent Regional Justice Center, some of our other parks facilities, like Steve Cox Memorial Center down in White Center, we've been able to install solar there and make it pencil. But you're correct, it's tougher definitely than the energy efficiency.
An area that we're weak in as a department, community development, is not having, we know about the technology obviously, and but we don't really have internal resources that are real good about explaining the technology, the structural implications, the financing, the permitting, and how to be most efficient. So we did sign on to, this is really a staff kind of designation for our city, but a Soul Smart community. And so we're about to begin in November through the Soul Smart initiative, where every month a designated city person is going to become educated on all those topics. And it's broken down into 8 or 9 different topics. Every month we're part of a training session where we become educated, and we can become better communicators, at least to our customers. We interact with a lot of folks out there that are developing and or making modifications to structures, homes or commercial structures. So we want to be a little bit better about how we can say, hey, this resource is out there, or you can approach it this way, or just to be able to jump into that conversation a little bit better.
Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Okay, you're welcome.
Very informative.
Thank you for having us. Appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
I'd be curious from my colleagues, is there consensus for interest in pursuing more of this?
Councilmember Whale.
I'd like to ask Jeff that question, if he would see value in our participation in this, and would he see us committing a staff member to go to these monthly meetings, and what his thoughts are. We keep adding staff members to different task forces and things, and how do you feel about the value of this?
I think it is a small financial investment and a small staff time investment to open up a lot of doors to information and connections. To me, it's a very simple business decision to participate. There's not the strings attached that are attached to some types of commitments like this, where you're signing on to do something very, we're getting in access into a network, is the way that I view that. And over time, right now, I think we'd sit at the table and we'd soak it in. And with any of these types of where you're involved with an organization or an initiative, you can dive deeper and be more involved and invest more time, maybe get more out of it. But to me, it's a pretty simple decision if the decision rested with me.
I think we're deeply involved as a city anyway in a lot of the regional activity, and this looks like it'd be right down our alley. It'd be a good investment of our time and effort, and like you said, for a small amount of money. Councilmember Brown.
Yeah, as the cartoon said, even if climate change is a hoax, one thing that it seems to me is, and I think the point was made, that individually the city has a small but significant impact, but I think collectively all of the cities make a much bigger impact. And so if we're going to do something, it would be more effective if we're all involved. So it would seem a reasonable investment for that purpose.
Councilmember DeCoursey.
So, I mentioned the building to the west of us, so Gustavus Manor, which is owned by the Housing Authority, we put a solar array up on that roof to do some sort of a energy efficiency related to water heating in the building. And although the meter never really ran backwards, it did provide some benefit, in looking at what it would produce for the future. And of course, at that time, again, the cost was a little bit more expensive than it would be now, as was mentioned. So the return was years instead of many years instead of a few years. What I do want to say, though, two things on here. One is that you mentioned the green team. And when I was at the Housing Authority, we had a green team, which was very efficient in looking at improvements being made across the spectrum of Housing Authority properties and such, which worked out really well. And I think looking at this as we go forward, any investment we make in this process, and again, refer back to the Housing Authority, we had an energy performance contract that actually provided a financial incentive to the Housing Authority for a 20-year period. And it was a substantial amount of money that came back to the Housing Authority, and it's still coming back for that period of time for not a totally expensive investment. It was a lot of money, but when you look at the return on that and the years it pays back, it was quite a benefit. So I would be in favor of looking at, the city, taking some steps in action that can provide some benefit now, but from future benefit that can be more substantial for the city and for the residents in the city as we go forward. So I think it's a good thing to look at.
Councilmember Trout
I have
Manuel.
to agree. I have seen it grow in the Walla Walla area and the Tri-Cities areas. Their motels and hotels have got panels, yards out there that are helping their business, save money. Also in Chehalis, my daughter has done that in her house. She has the whole side of her house where they started out with 2 small panels. Now they've added more, and they're starting to see a little bit of their investment coming back. So I agree with Mr. DeCoursey. I think maybe we should look into it and see how it evolves.
That answers your consensus question.
I think it does. I'd like to see the bocce ball court covered with a solar panel already.
I'd like to see it with a cover, period.
Another budget question later on. Okay, well, now
Here's Daryl.
we're gonna move to item 3A, which is a We Care clinic. Jeff, you're on again. You're the man of the hour.
Getting comfortable up here. Another visitor.
Good afternoon.
Next item on the agenda is a discussion about the We Care Clinic. And We Care Clinic is a proposal that's being put together by the Muckleshoot Indian Tribe. And with me is Joe, and I'm not going to try to pronounce your last name.
Oldujic.
Oldujic? Is that good?
Oldujic, yep.
Okay.
It's every letter.
If you get every letter, you got
That's
it.
right. So I'm really just going to turn it over to Joe to walk us through the presentation to council for this evening. I can move that, or you can.
Thank you for taking the time this evening to listen to our presentation. My name is Joel Lujic. I'm representing We Care Daily Clinics, which is an organization put together by the Muckleshoot Indian Tribe to help with the opioid epidemic that we're all dealing with, every community, including Muckleshoot. One of our main goals and our purposes, we're going to save lives, we're going to reunite families, we're going to enhance communities, we're going to improve communities. So with that being said, we'll walk through a slideshow, and there's not a whole lot of slides in the deck, and then hopefully we can have some dialogue afterwards if you have any questions. The purpose and inspiration, as I just sort of spoke of a little bit, we do this today. We do this now. We have expertise in this. We are recognized nationally for what we do with our opioid treatment up on the in our clinics in the reservation. We provide opioid treatment sessions for other tribes to come in and learn what we do. We have visitors come in all the time to understand how we run our clinics and how we run our behavioral health programs, to understand how they link together and why they're so effective compared to just a typical treatment facility versus what we do currently today. We know it's a national epidemic. You know, there's people who die every 20 minutes from this disease. 1 in 4 people who receive an opioid prescription have trouble getting off of it. There's been 259 million prescriptions written over time. So it is a large-scale problem that affects everybody, every community across our country. Locally, we know we have a problem. We know that there's 12 admissions per 1,000. 12 every 1,000 admissions are for opioid-related issues. We have the capacity today in the state to take care of 2 of those. So we have an 83% capacity gap to assist these clients, these individuals with their issues. You know, we've seen a 58% increase in King County last year of deaths due to heroin, which is the largest single increase for drug-related deaths in 17 years. So it affects us here. We know it's happening. We need everybody's help to try to cure this problem. What is medically assisted treatment? It is the program of prescription and counseling. So there's different types of solutions for this, but we like the solution of having both a prescription to help our clients and also extensive counseling, both group counseling and individual counseling. Today the regs are really, you have to have a group session once a month. You know, we plan on having a much more stringent program for our clients to help assist them in their recovery and improve our success rating compared to our national averages and things. So there's studies that show that prescriptions are necessary. This graph here shows the line that starts out with 20 individuals in the test. At the end of a year, 15 of them were still clean and sober. They're off their opioids. The ones who did not receive the prescription, none of them made it past I think that's day 60. So every one of them were back using. You know, and with this study, it also has not only the prescription, but also the counseling. So the counseling alone, the people who didn't receive the prescriptions still received counseling. So just counseling alone still is very challenging to try to cure the opioid issues that people deal with. I'm sorry about that. So the goal, increase access. These clients need to have easy access to a facility. This program needs them to come into the clinic on a daily basis. They need daily access into this facility. So by doing that, we have to have the right location. We have to have a location that's convenient, a location that has public access, public transportation, has good highway and road systems around it as well. And so that's one of our goals. You know, we will save lives by having this program here in Auburn. We will help improve communities. We see the people who are suffering from this addiction. We see them in front of our grocery stores. We see them on the street corners. We see them at the mall. We see them throughout our community on a daily basis. This medication, this treatment process will help those people get back into the workforce, off opioids, and not have that desire and the need to have those opioids moving forward. The commitment to patient-centered care. So this is where we're very unique in the industry. everybody has to do Medicaid assisted treatment. So everybody's doing the prescription and at least a little bit of counseling. We're doing the prescriptions like everybody else. We're going to be doing extensive counseling. Like I said, we'll be doing weekly counseling individually. We'll be doing group counseling on a weekly basis as well. So there'll be much more counseling and discussion to understand what's going on. There will also be basic primary care services. How is somebody supposed to beat the hardest addiction you've ever had in your life if you have an earache, if you have strep throat, if your arm is broken, if you need stitches? You know, some of us don't come to work if we have an earache. Oh, how are we going to deal with this? And how is somebody supposed to be able to beat an opioid addiction if they have those things and they're not being able to get those taken care of? We're going to do that in one shot. When they come in for their daily dose and their daily needs, and they say, hey, I hurt my arm, or I have this injury, or I don't feel well, we'll be able to take care of them right there. It's not going to send them somewhere else for 3 days later. We'll be able to address their issues immediately. The last thing we'll be adding is the family component of our program. So many of these families have had to push their loved ones away. There's been so much hurt and so much pain that they had to push them away and say, we can't have you here. At a certain point within our program, we'll be inviting that family back into their counseling. What that will do is that provides inspiration, hope, and acceptance, and knowing that that's going to be there upon their completion. And they may be to start integrating before their completion back into their family units. And we've seen that as one of the biggest success factors in what we do. The location of the facility is 3320 Auburn Way North. It has great transportation surrounding that facility. It's zoned for business. It's currently zoned heavy commercial. The capacity, we had a hard time finding a facility that was the right size. You know, this facility is 12,000 square feet. So it's a rather large facility for these type of clinics, but that's the size we need to be able to get our patients through quickly. We want them in and out in about 3 minutes for their typical dose. And so they're not going to be hanging around there. They'll be in, out, and on their way for the rest of their day. And just the logistics of where it's at, being able to promote stability in an area where we think it really needs help in that part of the community today. Safety and security are some things that we truly are focusing on and make sure that we are not affecting the community in a negative way. We'll have surveillance. We'll be patrolling areas around both our building, and if we know people are coming from public transportation or other areas, we'll be make sure that we're patrolling those areas as well with our personnel. We'll have clear signage so people understand what the rules are. There's no loitering. You must come. You must leave. We'll make sure of that. We'll have security there to make sure that they get on their way. We'll have an emergency hotline for people who may need assistance or there's a problem that comes up. So we'll have a hotline that will be answered, and we can respond to a question or an issue that may be happening. We will be offering some transportation. If somebody doesn't have a ride home or a ride to the facility, we will be to help them with that. We'll have 24/7 security guards on premise, and then we'll be also addressing and developing protocols and mitigation planning for issues that do arise. So if an issue does arise that we don't foresee, we're going to mitigate that. We're going to make sure that that's not happening moving forward on a day-in, day-out basis. If there are any comments or questions that people may want, they can email a question and post it to wecaredailyclinic.org, and that's where we track all the different comments coming in, and we'll respond to those comments through there as well. So,
Councilmember Brown.
Yes, a couple of questions. Number one, do you have a sense of the mix in terms of, members of the tribe versus members of the greater community, what that mix might look like? And secondly, have you done any surveying in the neighborhood in terms of communication?
So we have done some communication already to different individuals. So after this meeting is where we're planning on going out and communicating extensively with businesses, police force, fire, EMS, HOAs, schools. So we plan on doing that next as part of our communication plan. So we'll be doing extensive communication with all of those different areas and things of that nature. As far as the breakdown, we don't know what that breakdown is. We don't. You know, are there a lot of Native Americans that live off the reservation? Yes. I mean, statistically, 70% of Native Americans live in urban areas. So it needs to be convenient for not only Native Americans, but also non-Native Americans that are part of the community as well.
Okay. Councilmember Yolanda.
Back on your slide where you said you have extensive counseling and support to get these individuals back into their families, do you have a percentage of how many of them that are being treated and counseled actually do go back to their families?
Oh, I don't have the percentage. I just visualize the stories that the people who go through recovery that I get to hear. And they always end up back with their family. They always end up being able to integrate back with their children, which is something that, you know, we try to protect dearly within our community. So that always is a step that occurs to some point. You know, maybe all family members don't accept them back, but many of them do.
So of those, do they have relapse? Or do they go back into the community and become working individuals and stuff like that?
A lot of them do go back in the community and you know, start getting back into the workforce. Do we have relapses? Yes. Just like we're going to have relapses here when we're dealing with these clients in this clinic. All we can do is give them another opportunity. It might not have been the right time for that client to go through recovery. And we can do a lot of different things, but it still has to be the right time for them as well.
Mayor Backus.
Just a reminder as well, a good number of the clients that you're going to serve are functioning on a daily basis, and the reason your clinic hours are going to be early is so that they can come in prior to their work schedule and be able to work their normal shifts.
Correct.
Councilmember DeCoursey.
Joe, thank you for the presentation and the prior briefings we had on this, and also looking at your efforts on the safety and security. I applaud that. I have a concern, and glad to hear that your communication outreach will address HOAs in schools. We live on I Street, right across on 37th and I at the river, and that whole corridor of I Street is significantly residential. And I would be very interested and curious to see what the communication results are in relation to HOAs and those communities that may not have a significant presence with an HOA, but are residential areas along I Street, what their take is on this before we go forward with it. I think it becomes very critical in looking at our commercial zone, which is off of Auburn Way, but the block over is all residential. And there may be some opportunity to at least address that as we go forward. And again, I think I would be interested in seeing what the results of that would be.
And you are most definitely invited to come to the river and talk to our 300 numbers of people that are occupants of that community.
We'll be there.
Good. Any other questions? Thank you. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Next is item 3B, which is the airport runway enhancement update. Jeff, you're not going to stay for this?
I'll leave So good evening. For the record, Ingrid Gao, Public Works Director, and with me is Jacob Sweeting, the Assistant City Engineer. So you recall from some previous meetings, we've talked about the airport runway and kind of where we were at with FAA and some concerns that they had with the runway length. And previously, FAA had indicated that the maximum extension that they would allow was about 3,600 feet versus the a little over 4,000 feet that we were hoping for the airport runway. So after we got that information, we came back, we talked with the Airport Advisory Board and with council, and the decision at that point was to go ahead and put the project on hold while we tried to work through some issues with FAA to see if we could make some progress on getting a different length approved. So since then, we have gone through some discussions both at the legislative level as well as with FAA, and we have had some movement, however, not necessarily all the way up to what we had hoped for. So the desire to use the warm, wet runway calculation to get us to a little bit over 4,000 feet, because of the types of aircrafts that currently exist at the airport, is not acceptable under the current AIP funding program. And I need to stress that this has to do with whether it's justified under the AIP program today with the current aircraft mix that we have at the airport today. This is not necessarily looking at what we might have in the future. What we did make progress on is we did get the FAA to agree that the runway length, because we would be looking for 3,600 feet in either direction, would actually be about a total of 3,841. So it doesn't quite get us to 4,000, but it gets us quite a bit closer. And we also got them to concede that this includes the requirement for the displaced thresholds and for the declared distances, which last year when they gave us the notice that they would only approve 3,600 feet, that came with the qualifier that that would also mean not having displaced thresholds, which is not possible at the airport because of the constraints that we have outside the airport, such as the BPA power lines that are within the flight path. So given that information, we have three options. We did talk with the airport board about this about a week and a half ago, and at the end of this I'll go through kind of where the airport board came to a conclusion and a recommendation. So we have option one, which is proceeding with design and construction of the runway for the 3841 that FAA would approve. And up there I have the general cost of the project, which would be primarily funded through the FAA. And we're anticipating a 5% matching grant from WashDOT, and so airport is only funding 5% of that project. Pros, obviously the FAA will support it. The runway maintenance, which was the other concern that we mentioned the last time, that if we went with a 4,000-foot runway that wasn't approved by FAA, any maintenance work in the future also wouldn't be able to be funded by FAA. So by going with the 3841, that would be the case, that any future maintenance of that would be eligible for FAA funding. It does increase the safety for the planes. Obviously going from 3,400 feet, which is the current runway length, to 3,600 feet really didn't get a whole lot of improvement for us. But going to 3841 does get a fairly significant amount of safety improvement for the airport. We have some increased likelihood that we'll serve some of the smaller jets and the larger turboprop aircraft, so it's not out of the question that we wouldn't see any of that type of use. It just may not be to the extent that the 4118 and the master plan would be based on. And then, of course, some potential revenue increase if you see some of those increases in plane type being at the airport. Cons, again, a lot of your larger planes, some of your commercial planes may not want to use the airport runway because of the 4,000-foot magic number, if you will. During some of our discussion with the airport board, with some of the members from the airport community that were there was discussion about what that really means in a commercial aviation business, and that by going to the 3841, there is the potential that a commercial user could actually go to their insurance company and gain a waiver if they felt that they could still land at this airport and function appropriately. So it wasn't necessarily out of the realm of possibility that commercial use could still happen at 3841. Unlikely that they'd be able to get that waiver for a 3,600-foot runway, but at 3841, which is only 160 feet shorter than 4,000, it's a much more likely possibility. Other cons, a little bit less enticing for fixed base operations, again, depending upon some of the other amenities at the airport that will also have a factor on what commercial uses would actually come into the airport. Some other considerations. So one of the things we did discuss with FAA is that if the city chose to move forward with 3841, that we would not change our current airport layout plan. So our master plan would still show the 4,118-foot runway, so that if our fleet mix at the airport changes, so our critical aircraft changes, which is what the basis for the design is based on, if that changes, then it could get to a point where we could justify the 4118 in the future. Also, for the 3841, FAA would not require us to redo the environmental assessment or to modify it in any way, so that's a good cost savings. And it allows us to focus the airport funding that we do have on some of the other amenities and facility development that we need to do at the airport. And I don't think I have to remind you all of the facility condition assessment and all of the other needs that we have that are not FAA fundable. Okay, questions on option one?
What's the risk of having the larger planes come in without having the 40?
So every pilot has to, based upon current temperatures, current air conditions, they base how they land and how long of a runway that they need on their individual plane. So some of your commercial uses, the insurance companies say, because of that type of plane, we want you to land on 4,000 or longer. So if they choose to land on something less than 4,000 and they were to crash or an accident were to happen, they may not be covered by their insurance. But by going to the insurance company and getting the waiver, they would continue that coverage. Is that clear? So option two, similar to what we talked about previously, is that we could choose to go forward and try to build the full length of the runway identified in the master plan. There is significant cost changes to the airport for that because there is a significant portion of that project that would not be fundable by the FAA. So besides just the extension of the about 200 feet, it's also the impacting of the taxiway extension that would be needed and also the blast fencing that would be needed along 30th Street because of the proximity, how close we get to 30th Street. So some pros for that, obviously we meet our master plan. We have the ability for the larger planes to land in all weather conditions. And then it could also generate some more attractiveness for the airport for the FBOs. However, one of the cons is that, and this was discussed at the Airport Advisory Board as well, is that some of the issues that the airport would have is some of the other amenities that those commercial type businesses are looking for that we don't necessarily currently have there. And if we go forward with building the 4,118-foot runway, the airport funds would certainly be tied up in that. We also have, as we mentioned before, the inability we'd have to fund more of the maintenance going forward because portions of that wouldn't be eligible until such time as that critical aircraft changed. And at that point, then FAA would allow that to be potentially eligible. So it doesn't, by building it now, doesn't necessarily preclude us from becoming eligible for the full runway length in the future. And then it probably reduces our ability to bring in Jet A or to do some hangar improvements because it would basically take the funding that we have at the airport for trying to potentially do some of those improvements to do just the runway. Questions on option two? Okay, so option three, kind of what we talked about before, could leave it as is. It has the least financial impact on the airport. We can wait until it's more likely that FAA might support the 4118, although I don't know that that's likely without having a change in the critical aircraft. It allows us more time to do the zoning and land use planning around the airport so that they're more conducive to airport uses. And then focusing more on, again, the amenities and the other improvements that are necessary out at the airport. The con is what you have out there is what you have. The airport's definitely not any more enticing for the fixed-based operators. And there's no guarantee as to when that might change in the future for us to be able to do the extension. So we went through a pretty extensive discussion with the Airport Advisory Board on the 15th. And the Airport Advisory Board's recommendation was option one for many of the reasons that I mentioned in going through there. But basically the idea of utilizing the federal funds and preserving the airport funds for us to focus on other improvements such as Jet A fuel and getting the weather systems in there and working on some obstruction issues that are out there that would open up the airport to be more enticing to those commercial type uses was something that they would rather focus on with the airport's funds. And then it doesn't preclude us from going in the future to the 4118 if that critical aircraft does change, and that could happen a year after it's built, it could happen 5 years after it's built. It just depends upon what types of planes come into the airport and you start utilizing the airport. But if we don't have hangar facilities for some of those larger planes, it's going to be difficult for us to get them there anyway. Okay. Questions?
Councilmember DeCoursey.
Just a comment. I think, first of all, I want to thank the advisory board for doing some outstanding work here. This is really, really great to see how they've come about with their conclusions and what they would recommend. I like the fact that we can go back. I think first of all, I like the fact we go back. So there's always an opportunity to go back again, and maybe FAA someday will have a change of heart and be able to do something to give us the extra 200 and some odd feet. I also like the fact that it's their money. And we have a whole lot less investment on the city side of being able to do this under option one. And for me, I think all those positives, and although we have some cons here, we can probably work through that process and maybe still accommodate some of the things you talked about, Ingrid, and with waivers, perhaps, maybe John's probably better answer this, but with waivers, perhaps there's an opportunity for those other aircraft to be able to use the airport. I just think this is a good way to go, and I would be very supportive of looking at option one myself.
I do want to add that there are some risks with doing it piecemeals, where we're doing the 3841 and then in the future doing the 4118, so that everybody has a clear understanding of what the potential issues are, is that when we go forward at 4118, depending upon the timing of that, so if it's a year after we finish the current one or if it's 5 years after, we may end up having to do a whole nother environmental assessment through the FAA, so there's some additional costs associated with that. But again, if we have the critical aircraft change, all of that would be a 90% FAA grant that could go towards funding that. There's also potentially some changes that we would need to do long-term to the master planning to maintain the 4118. Their main concern is with the runway safety area on the north side, and they're concerned with 30th Street basically being in that runway safety area. And so that's not a small ask for us to go and look at what do we do with 30th Street to go to the 4118. Future FAA ADOs might have a different opinion on that, but the current one that's in place has made it very clear that if we wanted to go to the 4118, they'd be very concerned about that road being in that RSA. And so now you're talking about either closing the road or relocating the road, and relocating that road could be fairly significant with potential impacts to the properties north of the roadway.
Councilmember Wales, you have a question.
I'm excited by option one. I think that it's pretty consistent with the commitment that the council has shown over the years in wanting to continue to invest in the gem, our airport. I like the idea that we're working with the FAA and we're using the FAA as a primary funding source and with the maintenance. So, and our goal, it may take us a little longer to get there, but this seems to be a really fiscally responsible way with this kind of a partnership.
Any other questions?
So I've heard from 2 council members, if I could get just a head nod, that the rest are in agreement with option one.
Well, I think, from my standpoint, speaking as a council member, I would go for option. I think that as long as you don't affect my main route to get from my house over here, which is 30th. No, we'll look at that when we cross that bridge when we come to it. But yeah, I would be in support of option one.
And we got my support as well. I think it's pretty exciting, but you're right. We're not using our money. So, thank you.
Councilmember Wales.
I also want to thank you for being kind of tenacious on this. You know, the FAA has kind of been a little resistant, and you have just followed through with positive problem solving, and I think we're where we're.
Good staff helping, including
Yes.
Jacob and Jamel and
Yeah, so
everybody
you
else
guys
working
have done a
towards
really
that one.
nice job with an institution or agency that can sometimes be a little hard. So, nice job.
Councilmember Trout Manuel.
I was just wondering, when are you gonna do a tour, take the council out there on a tour? Could we do that? It would be really nice. I've never been there, and it would be nice to go as a group, and you guys can show us what needs to be improved and what we're doing right now.
We could go in groups of 3.
Of 3, well, yeah. I knew that was gonna come. But anyway, yeah. Okay, thank
We
you.
can work on that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We move into Public Works.
Should we go take a break first?
You want to take a break? Everybody want to take a break? Okay, let's go, come back at 7 o'clock, okay?
Soon.
So excited you jumped up and came right.
Type of airplanes that we're trying to attract, Cicada, TBM 700, the Pilatus, the Cessna Caravan.
Aviation.
What they are is single-engine turboprops. They carry around 12 passengers.
Yeah.
They all have a landing and takeoff distance of about 2,100 feet. They come in the process, just not in sufficient number for the FAA to justify it. And most of the pilots that fly those are the company jets. I mean, they fly their own turboprops. But their insurance won't insure them because they're not professional pilots for anything less than 4,000 feet. If they screw up, and they want a little extra, but someone like Jamal, he flies them in there, and he has a waiver on his insurance that he applied for and got, so he can land them in 2,100 feet all day long. He's demonstrated the ability. So what we're trying to do is get enough runway so that Joe Blow, who owns a parts manufacturing company in Auburn and San Francisco, can fly back and forth in his Cicada TB-10, TB-700. We're trying to attract him, because he doesn't have a professional corporate pilot. He flies his own airplane. And then the newest jet on the market is the new single-engine Cirrus jet. A single jet engine on a little hot rod, 6 seats in it. 1,300 feet to land, 1,300 feet to take off. That's it. It's a jet. But again, the insurance won't approve it under 4,000 feet because the average guy flying it is like me. Well, still.
Have a few drinks, you might.
You would be one of the passengers.
Yeah. I got a Q400 that you could fly.
I wanted to show you this.
I've got a, my son-in-law sent me this
Maybe,
meme.
she's an immigrant herself. I don't know how long she's been here, but.
Picture I saw, I think it was a Disney thing,
Yeah.
like Looney Bird.
Oh.
I don't think so. How's that?
That's a Q400,
Yeah.
the one that was stolen
That's the
from
one that was
Alaska
stolen.
I think
Airlines.
she has apologized, actually. And that's, but sorry.
T-shirt
Apologize
now.
for crossing the picket line.
Yeah.
Still never talking to you. You know,
Fly it
some
like it's
lines you
stolen.
just
I
cannot.
did.
So my son, I think I told you yesterday, is putting up our fence.
Yeah, runway links, because of the technology changes, are It's the insurance company.
Strictly?
Pretty much.
See those?
Oh, very nice. Wayne Osborne has those caps on his
Yeah.
too. Yeah, they're
They
very
look like
nice.
they're lit up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I haven't
Very
seen them
nice.
yet.
They just see it as a way
Nice
to
job.
ensure their investment.
It looks nice and it
Seems
provides some
great.
safety.
Yeah, exactly. It's just, yeah, that tickles me. Wow, that's cool.
Yeah. Very nice.
I can barely see.
Hey, did you notice the lights are on? Yeah, I saw it through the video cam. Check them out. Text me, let me know.
No, you can't be looking at your phone while the meeting's going.
That's right, that's why I don't do it.
Put that over there by Nancy. She likes those M&Ms.
You need them all, right?
Yeah.
Well, I get that darn almond joy, I can't resist them.
I know, those and,
Yeah.
Health evaluations, supervising reports, 2 timesheets, it's great. I got spoiled though, I got used to it.
We'll wait a couple extra minutes for John to come back.
Yeah. Me too, I've got like 4
oh
minutes.
yeah, I wanted to show you my back.
So he didn't print properly, so he's going over to make copies for you guys. So if he's not back.
No, you're gonna put it up there and then you're gonna forget it.
No,
Then you're gonna call me, then you're gonna say, you know, I just can't remember where it went.
That's my
So Jeff had to go print something for this. So if he's not back, we'll
Hanging up
go
in my
ahead
phone.
and
Something to do. Dim lights on.
He's not ready for the
he's going to put something like
Yeah,
that.
you need to figure
Oh,
it
yeah,
out.
so in case he's not back before we finish this.
Well, then it's a different
Sean
pattern.
just recommends we kind
Yes,
of
I've
skip
seen that.
down. She said,
Yeah.
we skip over that part.
That's funny.
And then we'll come back.
You're so mean. I found a Virgin Mary
Oh.
at a running stand. She was all faded and really old.
Yeah.
This spreadsheet starts with developing connectivity.
Right.
And then
And then you
my two business start.
some blocks. I made an altar for her.
Started
And then
Spreadsheet?
I built her inside my
printers.
notes. She looks beautiful.
So I was converted it, but it's never done that
Let me show
before.
you, my son just built that
So I'm
fence.
not really sure what that's about, because I don't.
Is that at your house?
Yeah, but this is an older picture.
Check that.
There it is. See, put those brass
Oh, yeah.
So Jeff's going to.
caps on there, and it's got a solar.
Yeah, we
so
have
are
those on
lit.
our deck.
Yeah,
And
I can't wait to get home and see it.
Did you relax on the couch last night?
my backyard.
That's how Mary is. She's watching these guys play. You know, they hit that ball. And she was why we were watching it last night. And it's just amazing to me that it's a lesson for us.
So far they have.
Smack that ball.
They both responded. Yes, an email back
We
from
do, we get a good shot.
executive director.
Obviously, a bit faster.
Top the hell out of it.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just getting done.
He sees each of you, then you can't necessarily do that.
Right.
Oh.
Well, I get my new foot next week.
I think we're ready to go here.
And now she's, the bottom father's coming over for dinner anytime. Margo, the reason why it's not doing anything is she hasn't been
Okay, we'll go ahead and reconvene. We're at the Public Works and Community Development discussion items, and we're going to start with our item 4A, Capital Project Status Report. And Ryan and Matt, take it away.
So for the record, my name is Ryan Bondrak. I'm the Capital Project Manager, and I have with me Matt Larson, the project engineer. We're here to talk about the Capital Project Status Report, as well as present the feature project for this quarter. So what we'd like to do is get right into the feature project, but first, just want to give you a little briefing that we are actively working on 36 projects, totaling about $53 million in total project value. 20 of those projects are currently in design, and 16 are in construction. And over the course of the next couple months, we anticipate 10 more projects approximately to go into the construction phase very soon. So it's an exciting time for us, even as we start entering the fall season. So with that, we'll go into the feature project.
So first I wanted to thank you to Council for giving me the opportunity to present on this very important safety project that we have coming up. It's the Auburn Way South Sidewalk Improvement Project. The location of the project is along Auburn Way South. It basically connects a missing link of sidewalk from around 17th Street Southeast up the hill to around the Muckleshoot Plaza intersection, which is right there by the bingo hall. And this sidewalk improvement project is solely the north side of the road. That's where the funding source is provided. That's part of the scope. It's just the north side of the road. So I just want to be clear on that. So the existing condition, as you can see in the pictures, we have, this is down here at 17, if you can see the cursor on the screen there. This is the lower end of the street down by 17th Street. You can see the sidewalk just kind of ends abruptly, and then it turns into a primitive trail, if you will, that pedestrians walk behind the guardrail. Once they get to the R Street Bridge, pedestrians will either go down to R Street and then back up the other side, or more likely they hop over the guardrail, they walk along the street on the bridge, which has a sidewalk on the bridge currently, and then they get to the other side, they hop back over the guardrail, and then they walk on the path again up to this point, which is the higher end of by the Muckleshoot Plaza. And this is just another picture of kind of midway through. You can see we have telephone poles and lots of obstructions and fairly steep slope, on the side. So just obviously not ideal for pedestrians. The corridor in this area is currently at 45 miles per hour too, and we'll get into the reason why I have that here shortly. So improvements and benefits, obviously install an ADA compliant sidewalk on the north side of Auburn Way South. It'll provide a safe route for pedestrians and along this heavily motorized corridor. It'll also, as part of this project, we are working with the Department of Transportation, since this is a state route, to reduce the speed along this corridor to match the corridor on both ends of the project, which is at 35 miles per hour. So this is the last segment of Auburn Way South in this area that is 45 miles per hour. So we've gotten verbal approval from them to go ahead and reduce the speed. The final approval will come once we get final design approval from them. So one of the discussions that we had internally and with the DOT was, how do you get vehicles to reduce from 45 to 35, and we'll be implementing traffic calming measures. One of those would be reduced travel lanes down from, they kind of vary through here, but basically 12-foot lanes to 11-foot lanes. just feel a little bit tighter. So it kind of slows down the vehicles. And then also we'll be putting curb and gutter, which goes along with the sidewalk. That also produces a visual effect that slows traffic down. It will also include C-curbing and raised island medians where warranted or where we have the space to do so. The roadway area up here is fairly narrow. The footprint is narrow. There's not a lot of options that we have because of the steep side slopes that we have to deal with. So,
Question before you go.
Yeah.
So in doing that, does that eliminate the guardrail?
No, so that's a great question. So what we'll end up doing is putting the guardrail behind the sidewalk, and we'll be providing, for the most part, it'll be a 7.5 foot sidewalk plus a 6 inches of curbing. So 7.5 foot sidewalk, which would put the guardrail 8 feet away from the curb line, the gutter line.
A term I'm not familiar with. What is C-curbing?
C-curbing is the precast curb along the center line of the roadway. It prevents cars from going across to the other side of the road.
Okay, gotcha. Okay.
All right.
So you mentioned that you're gonna reduce the speed limit to 35. Is that just temporary while you're doing the construction, or is that gonna be all the time?
Permanent.
Whoa. I live up there, and I know it's gonna drive a lot of people crazy.
And
Yeah, that's why I think that as a council, we need to say that before it is 35 and after it's 35. So we're going to make it consistent, then it makes sense, and that's the selling element.
yeah, it
Yeah.
makes it consistent from
Yes.
throughout the corridor. Yes. So the project schedule, we're looking at a design, currently in design. We're advertising September, October, so this fall, and then starting construction shortly thereafter. Basically, 400,000 of the money is coming from the TIB grant, and then the rest is coming from the City of Auburn funds for a total of 830,000 for the project. And the construction start is somewhat in limbo at this point. We're trying to come up with different methods to help with a kind of these high bids that have been coming in recently, and one of those methods, which I've been working with TIB directly, is possibly allowing the contractor to choose whether to start immediately or start in the spring, which would be conducive to their schedule and possibly get lower bids and help out the project funding.
So this type of project, and there's no construction expert, this type of project, if we started in November, and of course weather dependent, but if we experience some delays in that, contractor, are they going to automatically leave the site and then come back and not charge more, or how would that work if there's significant delays?
So with concrete, the biggest challenge with concrete is rain, right? And there are times where you can get, and you really just need a window of no rain for a few hours. So there are windows that we get those in the fall and winter. Another issue is freezing. We can't have freezing temperatures when we're pouring concrete. So those are challenges that the contractor would have to kind of juggle and see if they think that it's something worth going into as we head into the fall, or do they just want to say, well, we don't have any projects really slated for the spring, let's go ahead and bid it like we're going to bid it in the spring, and we'll have possibly lower bids.
Do the plants shut down at a period of time in winter time on the concrete batch plants?
Not typically.
Okay, they stay open.
You can pour concrete in the winter. There's just the curing of it is more costly. They basically have to heat it. They can produce it with hot water instead of regular water.
Councilmember Wills?
Will this result in us having to narrow the road down to one lane going north to accommodate the construction and stuff?
That's a good question. So the beauty of this one is that we do have some real estate on the south side of the road. So we're able to shift traffic to the south side of the road temporarily, which would give us enough room to maintain 2 lanes in each direction. So it will be a shift during construction, but it'll be temporary.
On the guardrail, currently, we have a difficulty in getting guardrail repair scheduled. With this contractor, they will have the equipment and whatever to be able to put in the guardrail
Yes.
in a reasonable amount of time.
Yes, they would still be, I mean, the contract requires them to get the work done within a certain number of working days. So yes, they would be required to do that.
Councilmember Trombley?
So are they gonna be working on these during the daytime or daytime and evening as well?
Most of this would be done during the day. So, but it would be, what we typically do, especially on Auburn Way South, because it is such a highly used corridor, we will typically put lane restrictions for directions of travel based on, commute hours.
Right.
So we won't allow the contractor to be out there during commute hours. So typically, you see it kind of slow down in coming into town at about 9 a.m. And so the contractor would be allowed to start at 9 a.m. and then work later in the afternoon because you don't have those high traffic volumes in the afternoon in that direction.
It starts getting congested like from 3 o'clock in the afternoon until 7, going up
Yes.
that way. It is just
Yeah, so
sometimes at a stop.
yeah, so the nice thing about this is the work on this one is on the north side, so the westbound
It
direction.
won't be affected, okay.
Yep. And there will be some impacts to traffic just because during construction, like we talked about earlier, there'll be a traffic shift. There'll be narrower lanes. It'll be a little bit more uncomfortable for the driver. So there will be some, slow down. It also helps with safety for the construction workers that are out there when people are slowing down a little bit more.
That's
So,
true,
yeah.
that's true.
Any other questions?
One more.
Another question?
How
Go
long
ahead.
is that gonna last? I'm sorry. I'm really concerned. We have had such a mess up there for so long, that now we're having some more construction and.
Yeah, so part of the design is to kind of come up with a reasonable time frame for the contractor to do this work. Right now, we have it slated for, it's showing up there 4 months. And that's not set in stone at this point. We're still kind of figuring out, what that looks like, how much time that actually is. But it's fairly safe to say that 4 months is pretty agreed. And I have had conversations with MIT because one of the driveways, really the only driveway that's in this corridor that we have to replace is a driveway that is part of the fireworks sales. And their only concern at this point is that we just don't do the work during that time. So, and that shouldn't be a problem.
The reason why I'm asking is because I don't want to be getting, people don't email me, they call me at home or they come knocking on my door. So this way, so I can have all the facts. Say, don't worry, you'll be done. Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Good.
Okay, so for the capital project status report, I have it on the screen. I don't know if I could be able to see it, but I do have some, it's not far away, but I do have some things that I want to show you on here. So for this capital project status report, we'll just go page by page. But a few things I want to point out before we get into it. We are currently updating the site that generates this report. And so you're going to see little inconsistencies that you've seen previously. And so I apologize for that in advance. And there's also a few projects that didn't get on the map or on the report that I'll talk about at the end. I'll bring up, and they will be on the next report when we're able to produce it. So we do think, though, that the updates that we're currently doing are going to be better improvements that are make it a better experience for the users that actually go onto the city site and look at this information and actually pull this report. So one of the things that we did change is you'll see the design finish date and the construction finish date is now in seasons as opposed to the months. And that is helpful for us because sometimes things change quickly, and then to update those dates all the time, it gets cumbersome. So it's a little bit easier to show it in the seasons. Outside of that, the other thing that's going on is, you guys know, the operator engineers union strike that's going on right now. That is pretty significant for a lot of our projects, as you guys know. And so I have put on this report, as you'll see when we go page by page, I put a little red dot on the projects that are impacted by that strike. So let's get into it. Any questions on page 1 of 9? Are you guys' pages numbered differently?
No, we have all the different numbers.
Page 1. Are there any questions? So the last project on there, if you hit the next button, Main Street signals upgrade. I just got a picture of the old signal that was up there. This is on Main Street and C Street. So the old signal, if you guys remember or recall, was a diagonal signal. And if you've been out there now, we now have a new signal, which, if you hit the button, is really nice looking. It matches our downtown standard, and it is functioning today. So we're pretty excited about that and have entered the substantially completed phase of the project, and so that one is near finished. Page 2. On page 2, I got 3 red dots. So 3 of those projects on this page are affected by the strike. You have the 37th Street and A Street traffic signal project. That is not currently being affected by the strike currently, but it could as we move along and need to do some paving work once the signal has been installed. And then you have the storm repair and replacement project, as well as the 15th Street preservation project.
I'm sorry, Councilmember Wales.
I thought that the crane operators were on strike. Do we have any cranes that are operating in Auburn on this 15th Street overlay?
Not with.
No, my understanding of the operator strike is that it's not just crane operators.
Okay.
It's it also encompasses the paving operators, the people who supply the asphalt, so their plants, along with, you know, excavators, loaders, all of the big, large pieces of equipment that you see on site. So, yeah.
Good to know.
Yeah.
That's a good explanation, I think. And Councilmember Brown could probably weigh as well.
Yeah, I was just going to explain that you know, I had a briefing from the operating engineers, and yeah, you're substantially correct. There are Associated General Contractors Master Agreement is what is at issue.
It's good to know that, so that, because I drive that road all the time, and it keeps saying that they're going to do work at night, and every morning I go by, and so it's good to know that, yeah, okay.
Well, Ingrid had given me some language last week, so we put it in the weekly update so that everybody would see, at least for 15th, that it was going to be an extended period of time.
I heard today that they're at least considering going back to the bargaining table, so we'll see what.
Yeah, I'd heard that they were at the table today, so.
Yeah. It's a significant union.
So any questions on the projects on page 2? So I do have a couple photos. The next 22nd Night Roundabout project is complete, so that is the finished product. It is really nice, so if you haven't driven by there, I recommend it. The plantings in the center is just
Mayor Mack and I drive that all the time.
Every day.
Every day, and it's really working out really well. I'm going to be curious to see how it transitions when school opens.
Okay. And then the next one is 15th Street, a little dark photo. It's
Excuse me, would you mind going back that one photo? I'm just curious if that is a shadow. I was concerned that was tire tracks across the. All right.
We haven't driven on it yet.
Yeah.
Hold that
Those are the
thought.
overhead power lines.
Here's 11.
So 15th Street, I apologize for the dark nature of this project, but we took it when it was the fog haziness going on. So they're installing traffic loops at that particular location. But you can see the pavement was ground off, and so we're just waiting for the pavement, them to be able to pave. But that's the existing condition of 15th Street. So significant project within our core, within our main hub of our town. So on page 3. The last project on this list is one that wasn't able to update, so just so you guys are aware that the WashDOT overlay project from SR 18 to 17th Street, this shows 15% done, but it's actually entering the punch list phase of that project, so it's near complete. So just a quick update on that. Okay. Page 4. The top project on that page, South 277th Street Preservation Project, is affected by the strike, but they are looking to install the video detection on the signals so they can start concrete work. So they're hoping to be able to continue on with some of the curb ramps that need to be installed along that project to keep moving.
Right, question for me on this. So, depending upon the duration of the operating engineer's strike, if it goes on for a significant period of time, how will this affect our projects in planning and design that we're going to be going out to bid for?
The ones that are in design?
Yeah, well, as we get ready to go out to bid on those and have to get back and catch up on these.
Yeah, luckily a lot of the projects that are going out to construction soon don't have that issue.
Okay.
So the 10 that I mentioned, a lot of them actually would not be affected. And we're hoping that everything gets resolved by the time they go out, where the significant work actually happens. The last project on that page, the Boeing Rail crossing median barriers. I got a photo of that just so if you haven't driven down C Street. That's the quick curb with little candles that they installed at the crossing on South 15th Street. Page 5. Now we're into our projects that are currently in design. And the rest of the projects are all design projects. Nothing on 5. Page 6. Nothing on 6.
Just on the CP 1724. So, how significant is that box culvert? Is this one of the large ones, or how is that actually going to take place there?
It is not going to be extremely large, but we have not actually, or we're not further enough into design to know the exact size of it. But it should not be the same size of the one. If you guys recall, the South 277th Street
right.
Project was a fairly large culvert. This one should be smaller than that. Page 7.
You know, and on this, the SCADA improvements, this is an example that we need to pat ourselves on the back regarding being energy efficient and whatever, flex time. We have the capabilities now with our staff using iPads and whatever to do some monitoring from home instead of having to be at work and some of those other things. So we are doing a lot more than we sometimes think as it relates to being energy efficient and wise with our customer dollars.
Okay, page 7. Nothing on page 7. Page 8. Nothing on 8. Page.
That's what it got me.
CQ 1807, where's that going to be at?
That is in various locations. Various, the meter vault and lid replacement, that's various locations. There's 8 of them. So it's I don't have a map currently on that project. Last page. So I apologize for the blank space at the top of page 9.
I
But
thought
the-
maybe we could add Bill Pelosa's 4th Street there.
Oh,
Well, I can't believe you didn't get any questions from him.
He's calling in.
any questions? So the 2 projects that did not get put on the report, we currently have out to advertise right now a rechannelization of multiple locations project. So striping, improving some striping, crosswalk locations at various locations. That one's out to bid, or out to advertise right now for construction bids. And then the other one is our A Street Southeast Preservation Project. So we're going to be preserving the existing pavement on A Street from Main Street to 17th Street. It's another grind and overlay project, and that project is currently in starting phases of design. So that project will get on the report for next month. So that's all we have. You guys have any other questions?
Just thank you for changing the finish dates and how you've done that by seasons. I think that's a tremendous help for us. Yeah. Any other questions? Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Rebecca.
It's not a question, I just wanted to share some information with all of you since he's still here. Jacob Sweeting has been promoted to city engineer effective Monday, September 3rd. So
Hey, congratulations.
Okay, next, Jeff Tate's back with our livable city update. Jeff.
Good evening again. I have to apologize because there is a page that's missing in your packet. So I am gonna pass this matrix around. Wait a moment, so I get to everybody.
It's all right.
Passed out one sheet, which has, it's a 2-sided matrix. In your packet, it's only 1-sided. I apologize for that. I don't know, it was probably 3 or 4 months ago that council asked to have a report back on livable cities projects. And so what we did was recall that it was through Community Development and Public Works and the work of the Environmental Services Division, which Chris Anderson, and then Jenna Leonard and Maggie Gibson had all been part of that group. They kicked off this project, and there were 15 projects that occurred out of the Livable Cities effort. And what this matrix does is it provides a summary statement of what each project was, informs who the lead sponsor is or the lead department within the city, and then an intent statement, a generalized intent statement for each project, as well as kind of a descriptor of where the action is or outcomes that came with each project, and then some description about that. So maybe the precursor to this is there are a number of different departments that were sponsors for different types of projects. So wanted to at least provide information to council, and if there's any particular project that council members would like to hear more about, we can come back and talk about those. I'm really capable of talking about those where community development is the lead sponsor. But then there's other departments too that are listed for different projects. And really a couple things that I would mention, just from a community development perspective, in the 6 projects that came from our area, or an area that I was working from, we had some home runs, I think, out of the effort, and then there were a couple that were not home runs. But you know, on balance, I think that for the money that community development put into these 4 projects, I feel it was good bang for buck. You know, it's a lot more that we got out of those products than we would have out of the private sector consulting business. So we were pretty pleased on, by and large, with the products and the experience. It was a positive experience for students, but it's a positive experience for staff to get to work with groups like that and kind of nurture them along professionally as much as we're getting a product back. I chose because my impression when I was in Seattle, and it was the final day of Livable Cities, and there was a lot of excitement, a lot of boards up showing different projects. The one that captured a lot of attention was the Alley project. And so I just decided that I'd throw a little bit more information into your packet, and this is actually in your packet, but a reminder of what a couple of those visuals look like. And that parks and community development and public works and finance have been looking at that project and participating in trying to brainstorm on how to make that come alive. The project that the University of Washington students put together, if we cost that out, is not an inexpensive project. So we're looking at some budget conscious approaches to implementing some of those ideas. And one of the first things that was really instrumental was the finance department, and in their solid waste and utilities area, was getting the alley clear of garbage receptacles. And it's hard to activate something when garbage trucks need to drive through it on a weekly basis. So you don't really think about, I don't think about those things that much until you get all of a sudden starting to look at a space and thinking, okay, there's some things we got to do before we can start putting lights up and putting color in there and plants and making it fun. So finance worked with the business community there and was able to consolidate a garbage collection into one location. And I think it made the business owners pretty pleased too, that it got cleaned up back there and there was one place to go, and it's a little bit out of the way, which now allows us to start looking at what we can do to activate that a little bit more. So Ingrid and her group are involved in that, Daryl and myself, sitting down and just brainstorming on different ideas. So that's something we're looking forward to coming back to council and talking more about. And that's why I'm kind of teeing it up in this discussion, is because we have some ideas that we're going to be bringing forward and we think are going to be ways to make it fun, but do it within some of our own budgets that we have, already in place.
Jeff, this looks really nice. I think it would be a lot of fun to get street dances, you know, dancing back there and everything, but on that garbage dumping, does that include the apartments that's there on that lot?
Yeah, so so if you think of in between the theater and the Arts and Culture Center, and of course in that building, so you have Nelson's, and then there's a second floor there, so there's some apartments. So it takes a collection of users, residential and commercial, and kind of puts them over into a spot that clears that space to be used for something else.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I was admiring your artist rendering on that one. I didn't see your hand waving over there, but this is really something I think is going to bring a lot of focus to downtown. That's a great idea.
You can really do something in there when you think about how the spaces are programmed and how they're going to be. You know, they're already. It's not like you're taking a dead space and you've got nothing else around it. You've got that Arts and Culture Center, which is on its way, and then you've got Auburn Ave events. It's going to be a neat place because, you know, a little platform with a stage, a place to sit, some seating, some, you know, ambient lighting to make it fun and safe, and color and art. It has a lot of potential.
Councilmember Wells?
Yeah, when are we going to have it on the matrix to have Darryl do a presentation on his thoughts on the Avenue Theater?
He's looking at when he can bring that back. I asked him about it last week.
Okay, great. This is good to have because it begins to create the vision. Thank you.
This is nice.
And I mean, it's fun to talk about that, and it's got some cool visuals, but if there's anything else on the matrix that I can try to answer a question about or try to help facilitate a future.
Councilmember Holman has a question.
Just an observation. The city of Rochester, Minnesota has activated a lot of their alleys. And the reason they did it was to increase the foot traffic at night. As you walk down a street and you pass a dark, dank alley, it frightened people. Now they have activated them with lighting and activity, and you want to walk around Rochester, Minnesota at night because the alleyways aren't frightening. So they did it to increase pedestrian traffic flow.
This makes me want to get a group together of our river residents and our musicians so we can come here and play. So I'm looking forward to that.
All right. It's on the record.
I have dances and you and I can dance. Yeah, we'll dance.
Okay. Is that it? Thank you, Jeff. All right. Very good. So that concludes our public portion. So Deputy Mayor Baggett can take the reins again.
Thank you, Councilmember DeCoursey. Okay, Roman numeral 5A, follow-up on identity theft questions. Stephen Gross.
Like to get things while they're still fresh in your mind. So following up from last week, council had some concerns about the proposal to adopt a version of the state identity theft statute as a misdemeanor or gross misdemeanor under the city code. I wanted to follow up before I sent my prosecutors and staff off to do a whole bunch of research. I wanted to hear what your thoughts were and what other information that you would like us to get for you. One piece that I do want to bring to you is that we talked about the county's charging decisions. It's in a document that's published. It's available online. The King County, it's called the FADS, the Filing and Disposition Standards, so you can look at them. The one that's applicable here is it talks about identity theft, and the main policy for the county is that they will decline to file an identity theft charge if the total value taken or attempted is less than or equal to $1,000. There's a couple of exemptions.
What was the number?
$1,000.
$1,000. Okay.
Yes. So that doesn't count the time you have to take to do all the paperwork and get new IDs and all that. It's the actual cash. So somebody writes a couple of checks or 5 checks, but they're under $1,000. The presumption from the county is to not file that charge. There are a bunch of exemptions. So that's where the county starts. So having that information, what other questions do you have for me?
Councilmember Wells?
I'd like to see a copy of that filing and disposition report as it relates.
It's 182 pages.
Maybe you can summarize it.
Yeah, I can just email you this copy. I'll email all of you blind CC so we don't violate the Open Public Meetings Act. I will send all of you an excerpt of that.
Also, I would like to know what our neighboring communities have done. Kent, Federal Way, maybe a couple in Pierce County that are close, like Sumner, in relationship to making it a gross misdemeanor.
I think that's a good point.
You said
Yeah,
Federal Way?
yeah. But I wanted a few from Pierce too.
Wait, because we have an issue apparently with the King County prosecutor. Are we seeing the same thing from the Pierce County prosecutor? And, as you heard me last Monday, expressing my views on this.
Yes.
When I hear the $1,000 threshold, I'm somebody who wants to perform identity theft. I've got a whole lot of opportunity to do a whole lot of $1,000, less than $1,000, identity theft incidents, and I'm just taking my chances because I'm not over that $1,000 threshold. So I don't know if it's multiple or,
There are exemptions, use or possession of 3 or more different victims' financial information.
Okay.
So if we find out that a person, that this is somebody that's getting a lot of those. Evidence of manufacturing personal identification, so if it's not just stealing and using, but it's somebody creating false IDs. And evidence that the suspect targeted a vulnerable victim, in cases like if there's a caregiver and that their information is stolen, or somebody that has a caregiver and their information is stolen, or evidence that the victim's information was stolen in a residential burglary, robbery, or theft from a person. So there are some circumstances. There's also provisions in the filing and disposition standards that talk about the ability to appeal the decision of the prosecutor. So an individual prosecutor makes a decision, then the sending jurisdiction could appeal that up to the chief criminal prosecutor.
Councilmember Wales.
I'm sorry.
My turn.
I wanted to know the difference between, if there is one, identity theft and forgery.
Those are 2 different crimes.
Yes. And so I'd like a definition of both.
Sure. I'll send you all copies of the statutes with the definitions in them.
Thank you for asking that question.
What else should we be asking you for so that we will have a full understanding?
If y'all, any or all y'all, would talk a little bit more about what you didn't hear from Bo and me about asking to have this thing. I always feel that I may not be explaining something clearly. So was there something you didn't get that, other than not being happy with the county's filing and disposition standards, did we make it clear to you that the difference between how the system works? So, felonies, we can't prosecute felonies at all. We can never prosecute felonies, just misdemeanors and gross misdemeanors. And so when a crime is presumptively a Class C felony and the county doesn't prosecute it, the only way we can charge it is to charge it under the attempt statute. Because under the attempt statute, everything gets knocked down one step. An attempted Class A felony is a Class B, and so on down the line. And so, did I make that clear to y'all before? So that wasn't a problem. So,
Mayor Backus.
Well, that was just part of what I wanted to remind everyone, was that we can't charge felonies, but I think what Steve and Bo mentioned in their presentation, maybe not as much, but it's more difficult to prove attempt than it is to prove the actual crime. So when they came forward and asked for the approval through ordinance to be able to charge it as a gross misdemeanor and not an attempt, which is still a gross misdemeanor, it was really to help them streamline their process and be able to probably get more convictions out of it, because it's easier in that case, since they committed the crime, to show the commit instead of attempt.
Councilmember Wales.
My concern with it is that we have an excellent legal department that I feel is working on all cylinders and doesn't need more work. And so I would be interested in knowing how many cases would annually qualify as a gross misdemeanor and what the workload would be that we're picking up. And I'm working from the prejudice point of view, is that the state and the county and everybody else wants us to do their job. And I want to know how much of the responsibility we would be relieving them of.
If you don't mind, in opposed to having my staff calculate some, try to go back and track all of these cases, what I can tell you is that it doesn't change our caseload at all. So if there's 25 cases of identity theft that the county declines, we are still going to review 25 cases to see if we can charge it as right now, to see if we can charge it as an attempted identity theft. Okay. So it's not going to add to our case law.
Okay, and I think that's important for us to have in writing too.
What it does do, what Bo tells us it does do, is he called it a legal fiction, and it's hard to explain that in many cases. That when I dropped the paperclip. I didn't attempt to drop the paperclip. I just dropped it. And so if I go in and try to convince a jury that we're charging this person with attempted identity theft, they're going to go back in the jury room and say, but didn't they steal the wallet and then use the credit card? Yes. Well, then they didn't attempt anything, so they get a reasonable doubt issue, and then they don't convict.
Yeah, my concern is the county is going to decline a certain percentage of cases. That's really not our call. We could write a resolution to King County Prosecutor Dan Satterberg, and this is an election year, asking him to tune that up a little bit more to our liking. But whether that would be worth the effort, I don't know. But they are always going to decline a certain number of cases, not because of the sufficiency of the crime, but because of the amount. Sufficiency meaning the evidence. So what would you have us do? Charge them under a attempt, just like the paperclip example, or give us something very specific tool that could work, that we could work with, which can carry up to a year's time in jail. It's better than nothing, and it changes. I can tell you, it is extremely frustrating to go to court with somebody dead to rights and have them get off on a technicality. Why add to the technicality? Let's make it clear so that even though we might think that they need to be in the felony category, a lot of times persons are committed to felonies but only get 30 days or a week or probation with a felony. So this makes it fit, maybe not the punishment as much as someone deserved that made your life miserable for a year, but it's language-wise more appropriate to what was committed. I don't know, how many spams did you get in the last week that tried to fish your ID out? It's out there.
Did you have another question?
Not directly in response to that, John, but again, having sat through a court proceeding, even on the felony side, where, as I mentioned last week, the judge just goes, like that, and going your merry way, and we'll give you a fine, and maybe we'll give you, and give you some credit for time served, which may be just a few days or a week, or whatever. But it lessens the effect of what it is. To me, in looking at a felony, the implications on that on the individual are much more severe than a gross misdemeanor. You lose many of your rights with a felony. You have something on your record that employers look at that is very detrimental, especially when it comes to identity theft. There's just a lot of things looking at it from the felony standpoint. It has, to me, much more implications for the individual committing the crime. And perhaps, looking at it from the attempt and, going that far and And maybe holding judges more accountable for sentencing, whatever, is where we need to go with it. But I think we, again, need to have a much more concerted effort on elected officials' part of, and not just City Council of Auburn, but elected officials' part, including state legislature, of bolstering up the criminal offenses and maybe perhaps giving it more credibility in relation to sentencing and opportunities for less, maybe less plea bargaining, I don't know, but to give it more credence in how it's addressed, because it is a major issue and will continue to be a major issue. And criminals are criminals, and they're going to find a way out of it no matter what. But giving them a little bit less of an opportunity when still being a felony, and again, having the prosecutors do their jobs, to me, is where this needs to go.
Councilmember Wales.
Hey,
Councilmember Brown.
you were first, weren't you?
Doesn't matter.
You sure?
We called on you.
Okay. Is the standard of burden as high, or is it equal when it's a felony or it's a gross misdemeanor?
The burden of proof of the prosecution is the same. It's beyond a reasonable doubt.
Okay, then I can take that a little bit further. If the prosecutor looks at one of these situations, this identity theft, and decides that it doesn't have enough evidence, they're professional, so it rolls over to us as a gross misdemeanor. We still have to have the same standard of evidence. We would probably roll on it also.
That is another possibility. We hadn't talked about that. We've been talking about the circumstance where presumptively there's enough information to go to trial. There's enough evidence to go to trial, and the county, just because of its filing standard, says it's under $1,000. The other 4 options aren't there, so the presumption is we're not going to do that. One of the other things that I'll send all of you is a copy. There's a state statute that provides for guidelines to prosecutors for when to charge and when not to charge. And they're all guidelines because each individual prosecutor has discretion, and then the chief prosecutor's got discretion to set policy for their department. But even under the state statute, there's a charging decision in there that says if the cost of prosecution is would be outweighed, then in many cases, because you can't get a witness or you can't necessarily identify a victim or the person that's perpetrated, or if there's insufficient evidence to get a conviction, the prosecutor can always say, I just realized I'm talking really fast, as is a habit. Somebody needs to do this when I do that for me. That's not bowing down. So the prosecutor always has those options, and so we're just talking about the circumstance where the county is declining because of their filing guidelines. We're not talking about an issue where the county kicks it back and says, we don't think there's enough evidence to get a conviction on this. Then our prosecutors can look at that, and they may make the same determination. They can say, yeah, you're right, there's not enough evidence to get a conviction, or they may look at it and say there isn't now, and they'll send it back to the police department and say, do a little more investigation for us, and they may come back and say there's enough here for us to charge it, even if the county won't.
Councilmember Brown.
So in our discussions last week, it was my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that the question before us was not whether or not the county prosecutor decides to file. It was if they do not file, then we have, under the proposed change of the ordinance or of the city code, we have the option to file our own charge of a gross misdemeanor.
Correct.
As opposed to an attempt to commit the crime.
Yes, it gives us a direct charge of identity theft as opposed to an indirect charge of attempted identity theft.
So then, two questions. With that option of the gross misdemeanor as opposed to the attempt to commit the crime, do we have a better opportunity for a conviction under the gross misdemeanor as opposed to the attempted to commit the crime?
The short answer to your question is yes. One quick clarification, they're both still gross misdemeanors. One's a direct gross misdemeanor
Right.
because it's identity theft. The other is a gross misdemeanor because it's an attempt to commit a Class C felony. But they're both gross misdemeanors with the same maximum sentence and fine.
But the
One is a
likelihood,
direct charge, one is an indirect charge.
the likelihood, though, of a conviction is greater.
That's what my chief prosecutor says. He says it's easier to present a direct charge to a jury.
And so there would be perhaps greater deterrence.
That's a safe
If
assumption.
people understand that there's a greater chance for conviction.
That's a safe assumption.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I have
Questions?
4 things to bring back. I'll put a memo together and send it back to y'all, hopefully in time for your next study session, if not the one after that.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Okay, which brings us to our matrix.
Pretty good movie. I had to watch it twice before I got it.
Councilmember Wales.
Yeah, I'd like to see us add, even though we don't have a date, because Nancy's working on it with Daryl, that we put on here the Avenue Theater as a placeholder.
See forehead nodding.
Everybody concur with that?
1, 2, 3, 4. Thank you.
Yolanda, do you concur? Yolanda,
What's that?
do you concur with that?
On what's going on?
Are you on your phone?
I'm looking at mine for the matrix. I got it on a note.
Okay, just
Okay.
checking.
Yes, I concur with that.
Thank you.
Yes.
I already gave Steve the nod.
So,
right.
I have confirmation from Stephen Norman from the Housing Authority that he will join us on October 22nd for that affordable housing update as part of this. So to be TBD, that Director Tanner also will be 10/22 for that. And I've asked for Mr. Norman to present us with a count, the best that they can, of the number of affordable housing units in Auburn, also regionally. And then also what the Housing Authority has done in Auburn over the past few years, what the potential plans are for the future, and then also of looking at how the opportunity for preservation of existing housing is working within the Housing Authority, and how we can do this more in Auburn and then regionally as well.
I would like to see you add to that presentation your little thing on workforce housing, the percentage, the public housing, the rent burden group, and the HUD group.
We can do that.
If you could put it all on one piece of paper, kind of a cheat sheet, it would help me greatly.
That's under
it all in
human,
20 seconds.
that's under human services,
Oh, I'm
affordable
sorry.
housing.
Okay. It is, isn't it?
Yes.
Well, it was under affordable housing stock, under public works and community
Okay.
development. That's the one I was looking at.
Okay.
That's the one for 10/22.
Okay. I'm sorry, Mayor.
So there was a request at the directors' meeting this morning to see if the road ad hoc committee report could be moved to 10/22 as well.
Yeah, probably so. Yeah, we're having a few more meetings, so we can probably have something ready to go by then. Okay.
Okay.
I'm not speaking from other committee members, so. We should do that.
Okay, we're looking at finance.
Finance, well, Shelley has set a date for 10/8 for a cost of service study, so that's coming up. And we still have a to be determined for the annexation study, but City Attorney Gross and I have had discussions on this subject as recent as last week. So that's proceeding to come to a.
Still TBD until.
Still TBD, but we're making progress.
If I could ask, I think we resolved the process issues you had. What other information does council want from staff to move forward on this?
Yeah, what would you like to see?
Otherwise, I think they're ready to present anytime.
Okay, then let's make it the next finance focus area. What is that? Is that 10-8?
October 8th.
10-8.
10-8.
Okay. Got it. Are there any other additions or corrections? Yes,
I'd
Claude.
like us to consider, I'll premise this first, another item here. Kroger has recently announced that they're going to be banning plastic bags in all their stores, which includes Fred Meyer here, by 2019. So that's a corporate decision they've made to do that. I would like us to explore the possibility of banning plastic bags citywide. A number of local jurisdictions have done this, and there's pros and cons to each effect of whether or not, you know, this should be done, and the cost factor include that of paper bags and such. But I'd like us to at least have a discussion on this since Kroger's taking the initiative to go forward with it.
I would agree to have that on there.
I agree.
John, what do you think?
We have a plastic bag manufacturer in town. I'm wondering what that'll be part of the discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can have the discussion.
I would like to add on mine, the Blue Ribbon Committee.
What is that?
That is, I would like to, we're gonna have a summit here pretty soon. And I would like her to come back and share that with the council.
The results or so it'll be after September 20th then, so.
Well, my next meeting's the 24th, but we're gonna meet with Dana on Thursday, so.
I'm sorry, what was the
Blue Ribbon
committee update
Committee update,
on 9/24?
yeah.
Well, it's more specific than that. It's the,
Well, we'll have her, I'll
You
have,
wanna
I'll talk
talk
to
about
her,
everything
yeah,
they're doing
because
in general?
She's been doing a lot.
well, yeah, she's pretty
So
busy.
I would like an update on that.
So it's not just the menu items for the
You
restaurants.
know, there's mental health and some other stuff that she's been doing.
And what date did we want to
The
do?
24th, September 24th.
Okay.
Get more heads on that one.
24.
We need she wanted to know how many agree with that.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Okay. Any other additions or corrections? Yes, ma'am.
Mayor Backus, have we changed our philosophy at all on grocery carts and picking up grocery carts, or are we still operating under?
Still operating under the same guidelines that you heard of last time.
Okay, thank you. So if we get any questions, we should refer them back to you?
Questions, they can come to our office or they can go to Public Works.
Okay, thank you.
Any other additions or corrections? Okay. With that, we are adjourned. Thank you.